Hey guys, we're gonna do things a little differently today. I needed everyone to download this PDF before class. I want to make sure we get through this stuff real quickly. So here's everything we need to know for the trimester exam, which we'll go over in parts starting that last week of the trimester. So here we are now, chapter 12, and chapter 12, Pope Pius IX and the Modern Era. We're going to get into a little bit of things that really shaped us and who we are today. So, section 1 starts off with this prediction by Tertullian in the first century. Tertullian said Christianity will grow and grow and grow and become the culture, the norm after the fall of Rome. And this will last for about 1,000 years. And that's what we've just seen. We saw persecution in the church in the first 300 years. And then we saw the rise of Christianity for about 1,000 years. And then the Reformation happened. And from then, it's been very contentious with people going against the church because of political reasons, not really spiritual reasons. And then Tertullian says there will be a new age where people reject the faith and the church. And this leads to new ideologies that focus on the greatness of man instead of the greatness of God. And this is the basis of modern socialism, Marxism, Freemasonry, and radical liberalism. And we'll go through all those words as we go. At this same time as this downfall of the church in many ways, we see a time of these new saints that emerge. Some of the greatest saints that have happened in the history of the church have come out of these modern times, these recent times. So who are we going to start with? We're going to start with Pope Pius IX, and he has the longest papacy in the history of the church after St. Peter. So St. Peter was Pope longest, then Pope Pius IX, and then I think Pope John Paul II. So we usually the average length of a papacy is about 8 years, which is like 2 terms of a U.S. president. So to be Pope for over 20 years is very, very rare. So what's going on in Europe right now? We see this rise of liberalism, and this is not the same liberalism as American liberalism. When we talk about left and right, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, those are American words. Those are not words the way we need to understand them for our time period that we're in right now. We're talking right now about what's known as classical liberalism. What did classical liberalism want? They wanted to break human society from the need for structured religion, and they wanted no belief in traditional religious morality, values, purpose, or need for heaven or grace or the need for God. And before modern liberalism, it was understood that everybody had a duty to God and a duty to follow the rules, and morality was determined by the church of what's right and what's wrong. And this new age of liberalism, the word liberal means to free, to have liberty, to liberate something, to be free. Like I said, they want to be free from this organized religion. Today, this is referred to as secularism. Secular is the opposite of sacred in terminology. So if something is secular, or if something is sacred, it's for God. It's reserved for God. If it's secular, it means it's not has anything to do with God. You'll hear it most commonly in secular music. We'll talk about just radio music, and then sacred music is music just used for church. So that's the first thing we're going to pin down is this liberalism, this classical liberalism. What's next? Freemasonry. You may have heard of Freemasons. You may have heard that there have been many famous people in politics and history who have been Freemasons. What is Freemasonry? It's a secret organization dedicated to spreading these ideas of liberalism and secularism. They wanted freedom from the church's influence, and they were a secret society and still are today. It's like a network of people who help each other to kind of advance these missions of liberalism and secularism. So those 2 words right off the bat: liberalism, Freemasonry. What's next? Pope Gregory XVI. He was the first pope to condemn the slave trade in 1839, 24 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. So he saw what was happening in the slave trade and said how awful it was, and expressed how the United States needs to change, needs to recognize all people's dignities and rights. And this was advancing before even the political government was taking action for this. He pressured European leaders to reform the papal states. They resisted, believed pressure was an attempt to weaken his faith. His main concern in his papacy was this idea of indifferentism. What does it mean to be indifferent? It just means to not care about anything. And this is still a problem in the world today. It's not that people reject religion in most cases. It's that they're indifferent. It doesn't cross their mind to go to church. It doesn't cross their mind to believe in what God wants for them or to believe in the scriptures. They're indifferent. All that matters is that you're a good person, and that's arbitrarily decided. What does it mean to be a good person? Our belief in the Catholic faith and the Christian faith is if all you had to do was be a good person, why would God have suffered and died to establish this church to provide grace for us? So it's kind of incomprehensible with the Catholic faith to just believe all you have to do is be a good person, because who defines good? Think back to any action anybody does. They always do it because they think it's good, and it doesn't always mean that it is good. So how do you determine what it means to be good? Political leaders wanted the church's voice silenced. Gregory XVI also centralized authority in the papal states. European leaders wanted Gregory to loosen his control, and he responded by moving more authority over his country. We're going to see in a little bit, Italy is going to change drastically. And it's in this process of the Risorgimento, which is the Italian War for Unification. We think of Italy as this old place that's always been there, and especially if we're of Italian descent, we think of Italy as, always being Italy. But it's not the case. If we look at maps and everything, we'll see that most of the last 2,000 years, Italy has been kingdoms: the Kingdom of Naples, the Kingdom of Florence, Kingdom of Venice. Venice was a city-state, the Papal States. It's very divided. But at this time, there's a desire to unify. Even though it was divided, they spoke the same language and they had similar cultures. So now they're trying to work together and band together. This was a movement led by the Freemasons, liberals, and the Carbonari. The Carbonari was a violent anti-Catholic branch of Freemasonry. They worked to dismantle the structure of the church in Italy. They wanted the kingdoms of the Italian peninsula to be united. And this happens in the course of time. We'll kind of see that as it plays out. As we jump into talking about Pius IX, and in Italian, Pius IX is Pio Nono, so that's what many people called him around the world because it has a nice ring to it. What do we need to know about him? He was elected to bring compromise between the church and those trying to unify Italy. So we have a compromise pope. Last time we had a compromise pope, it was Peter Marone. Remember when we had the argument between France and Italy of who should be pope, the French popes or the French cardinals or the Italian cardinals? They settled on Celestine V, who abdicated. That was a compromise. They didn't think he was going to be good or bad. They just knew that he wouldn't really do anything too shocking. They were wrong. They chose Pius IX. Many believed he was their pope. So if you were on the liberal side, you thought that Pius IX was on your side. If you were on the not liberal side, you thought Pius was on your side. He was very much what we say a pope of the people. Everybody loved him. He was not looking to kind of push anybody around. Pius IX supported good ideas of all parties, but did not endorse a particular party. This is something that we as Catholics should know about today. If you were going to say the Catholic Church is more Democratic or Republican, you really couldn't answer that, because the church is not Democrat or Republican. The church is the church. And there are things about what the Democratic Party holds that are very good. And there are things about what the Republican Party holds that are very good. But there are also things on each side that the church can't stand for. And because of that, Catholics are in a very divided time today of which party is the party to vote for or the party to support. So Catholics today have a very difficult time, and Catholics back then did too in Italy. And Pope Pius IX recognized that there is good on both sides. Unfortunately, there are two sides, and those two sides were in very deep conflict. Pius IX loved being around the people, not locked away in the papal palace. He would take strolls in Rome and greet regular people. And this was really the first time also that photography went along with the papacy. So people saw the Pope interacting in the streets. Those things made the papers. They went around the world. So he was a very, very personable Pope, not unlike Pope Francis today, who is constantly seen, greeting everybody and trying to meet with as many people as possible. Pius IX was a Pope very similar to this. At first, people thought Pius IX would side with the liberals. They believed that he was a new kind of Pope. They believed Pius IX was with the times. He released all political prisoners of the Papal States, which was kind of shocking. Pius IX figured, why does the Pope have to have prisoners of the Papal States? That seems to be very not what a Pope should do. So he releases them. He established advisory boards of lay people. Before Pius IX, anybody and everybody who was a helper of the Pope was a priest. From the people in charge of maintenance to the secretaries of state to papal nuncios, everybody had to be a priest. Pius IX, very different, very modern, starts adding lay people, regular people like us, to his advisory boards, and that was very revolutionary. He tried to compromise with the revolutionaries. He proposed a constitutional monarchy. People would govern themselves. The Pope would be the symbolic figurehead of the Papal States. So that's very much similar to England today. The people in the UK, they vote for their parliament. Their parliament makes the decisions of how the country runs. And the Queen is the Queen. She's supported by the country, but she's just a figurehead. She doesn't weigh in on political matters. She has limited power, and that's what the Pope was trying to propose. But the revolutionaries rejected this. Pius believed that negotiations weren't going to help, and the revolution continues in Italy. Eventually, General Giuseppe Garibaldi unifies all the kingdoms and starts to encroach on the Papal States. And it is at this time that the Papal States is annexed in 1870. So all that land in central Italy that was the Pope's, annexed by Italy. And now we have a unified Italy. And the only part of the Papal States that's still left today is Vatican City. So it's not a whole country anymore in what it used to be. It is still a country. It's the world's smallest country. And it is the last remaining territory of the Papal States. Pius considered himself the prisoner of the Vatican, meaning that now he has lost his land. And from this point on, if a pope was elected, the pope would not leave Vatican City until 1929. So it wasn't until 1920s where it was where a pope had the ability to leave the walls of the Vatican, because times had changed by then, and he calls himself the prisoner of the Vatican, and he never leaves. So popes after Pius IX, when they were elected, they never went back home. They never traveled the world, which is something we couldn't even think about today, because now popes are so world travelers. They go all over the place. They're seen by so many. But that wasn't the case for such a long time. Section 3, Pius IX still. He's had the longest papacy, so he's going to be in a few sections. Pius IX fights against the new philosophies, nationalism, which we've talked about 100 times, secularism, Freemasonry, differentism, all these things we just talked about. He issues this thing called the Syllabus of Errors, and it's a syllabus, which is just like a list of the things that are wrong with these new isms, these new ideologies, condemning them and explaining where they're going to lead us if we keep going down this road. Section B, point B, maybe is a better way of saying it. We have to know this word, ultramontanists. Ultramontanist is a word that means from over the mountains in Germany. German Christians believed and this idea was very widespread, that everything the Pope says, everything, was infallible. With infallible means without error. Others believed the Pope was only infallible when he was in union with the bishops of the church. So he has to be in communion with the rest of the bishops. So which is it? Because one has to be true and one has to be false. So Pope Pius IX does what hasn't been done since the Council of Trent in 1545, and he declares there will be a ecumenical council. It's called the First Vatican Council, or Vatican I, in 1869 to 1879. The topic of papal infallibility came up, and the bishops decided that the Pope can teach without error under certain conditions. What are those 4 conditions? Like I said, there are 4. The belief was that the Pope could be teaching something without error, meaning there's no mistake in it, if he's speaking first ex cathedra. What does that mean? It means from the chair. Cathedra means chair. That's why the head of the diocese is called the cathedral, because that's where the chair of the bishop is. And this means that he has to be acting as the successor of St. Peter, not just a regular bishop. He must be speaking to the whole church, not a particular group, not in an interview or an article in a newspaper. So if the Pope travels to New York and says, greetings to the Catholics in the United States, here's my message for you, there's nothing infallible about it. It's just the Pope's message for that group of people. He must be speaking on matters of faith or morals. This is huge. The church is infallible, meaning it does not teach anything that's incorrect, only in matters of faith and morals. So matters of faith are what God has revealed to us, and if God has revealed it, it's true. And matters of morals have to do with right and wrong. The Pope can't say the best color is blue. That has nothing to do with faith or morals. So therefore, that teaching can't be infallible. It's just his opinion. So like we said, these are things that are revealed by God and obviously true. And the Pope can teach about these things without error because God is without error. And the Pope has to be intentionally issuing an infallible teaching. He cannot just accidentally create a new teaching without thinking about it. There's actually a formula and words used that go along with this. And that has happened 2 times in the history of the church, and we'll see that on the next slide. 2 times. And in those 2 times, the Pope has said, I hereby declare and define the following truth to be dogma of the church, or to be the true teaching of the church. And then he says what he's teaching. And the 2 were that Mary was conceived without sin, and that Mary was assumed into heaven at the end of her life, body and soul. Those are the 2 things we've ever had papal infallible teachings on. And those are things that everybody already believed. They just had no teaching to go along with it. And that's kind of why we have papal infallibility. Papal infallibility does not mean that the Pope cannot make mistakes. He can make mistakes on his opinion on things. He can make mistakes, just like everybody can make mistakes. But it means that his mistakes are not infallible. It's just when these 4 criteria are met, and he's intending to do so to the whole world as the Pope on faith and morals, that's when the Pope is infallible. The church can also teach infallibly in 2 other ways. The ordinary magisterium, when all the bishops of the world are in union on something. So take the issue of, do you have to go to Mass on Sunday? Every bishop in the world would say yes. So that's not something that the Pope is infallible about. That's something that the teaching office of the church, the magisterium, is infallible about. And the second time the church can be infallible, or the third time actually, is when we have the extraordinary magisterium. And this is anytime the bishops are gathered in an ecumenical council like Vatican I, like the Council of Trent, like the Council of Nicaea, like the Council of Constantinople. Those teachings that come out of that council, they're extraordinary. That's not usually how we solve problems or give teachings, but if it happens, it's infallible because they have to do with faith and morals. It's taught by all the bishops in the world, and it's given to the entire church, not just a small group. And this, like I said, has only happened 2 times, the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption of Mary. All right, that'll be all we do today. We'll keep this video up so you can rewatch it if you have any questions. But I wanted to get through this part at least, and we will continue this chapter next class. and we'll have everything we need to get through before the end of this trimester. You guys are in good shape. Stick with the homeworks, and I might modify the homeworks as we go along, just to kind of give us a more homework that reflects kind of what we're doing. But other than that, hope everybody stays well. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys again next class.